The first step that we need to do is we need to create and pour our agarose gel. So I'm going to weigh out exactly 1.68 grams of agarose powder, which is kind of like a scientific jello. So if you've ever made jello, you've done something similar. So I'm going to use my scale. First thing I'm going to do is hit tare so it doesn't count the weight of my weigh boat. And I'm going to take my powder. And I'm going to slowly go. I'm at half a gram and I wanted 1.68. Getting close, 1.35. You can see it's not very much. I got a little bit too much, so I'm going to take some out. And 1.67, which is close enough. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my agarose powder into this bottle. And now I need a liquid. When you make jello, you typically use water, but for this investigation, I'm going to use what we call a buffer, which is just a mix of water and some other solutes that allow us to conduct electricity through it eventually, and we'll talk about that. So I have exactly 240 milliliters. I'm going to pour it in here. So now you can see it's a little bit cloudy. So my next step is going to be heating it up in the microwave so that we can make sure that it dissolves, that powder dissolves. So when it's properly heated, this will be completely clear, so we'll be able to see through it. So I'm going to take it over to the microwave and I'm going to heat it for about 2 minutes in short blasts of about 30 seconds each so that it doesn't overheat. So the same way that when you pour jello, you pour it into a jello mold, I'm going to create a mold where I want to pour this agarose gel. And this mold is going to be what we use to put our DNA samples in and run them through our gel electrophoresis chamber. So here's the pieces of the mold that I'm going to use. I have a tray here, I have a small gel casting tray, and I have what we call a cone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in here, and then I tighten this, and this makes it so that it can't leak out when I pour this agarose into it. And I need to wait a few minutes for my agarose to cool because we can't pour it when it's too hot. Okay, my next step is to finish setting up my gel tray, and then I'm going to pour my agarose that I melted into here, the same way you would pour jello into a jello mold. So the first thing is I'm putting in my cone. My cone has little teeth, and these teeth are going to make what we call the wells where we put our DNA into. I'm going to set that in there, and I'll pour enough of my agarose gel to fill up my tray. And then I'm going to need to set it aside and let it solidify, the same way you might set jello aside or in the refrigerator so that it sets up. So one of the first things I need to do is I need to add a restriction enzyme to my sample. So by adding this restriction enzyme, we're looking for differences in people's DNA. So we have our restriction enzyme in this tube. I'm going to use a tool called the micropipette. A micropipette is like a fancy eyedropper, and it allows us to measure out very precise amounts of liquid and very small amounts of liquid. So in this case, I'm going to measure out 4 microliters. 4 microliters is 1/millionth of a liter. Because I want to be able to use this pipette over and over again, every time I use it, I put on a plastic tip. These are disposable tips. These tips are very cheap, and I change them in between each sample, and that keeps my pipette clean and makes sure I don't contaminate my samples. And And now I'm going to add my restriction enzyme to each one of these. And I'm only adding 4 microliters of liquid. My crime scene. Suspect 1. My gel has now been sitting here and it's solidified, so it's time for me to remove it from what we call the gel casting tray and to get it ready by putting it into my gel electrophoresis box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully pull out that comb, and remember that comb is what made those little wells that our DNA is going to go into. And now I loosen this and I pull out my gel, and now I have a gel. This is our gel electrophoresis chamber, and I'm going to open it up. I will put my gel tray inside. And what's important is our gel electrophoresis chamber is what is going to allow us to run electricity through this gel so that we can separate our DNA out by fragment size. So you'll notice I have a negative pole and a positive pole, and what's going to happen is DNA is negatively charged. So if I put it into this device and run electricity through it, the negatively charged DNA is going to be attracted to the positive pole. So it's going to get pulled down through this agarose gel towards this positive pole. And that's going to allow me to look at and visualize my DNA separated by size. When we run DNA through a gel electrophoresis chamber, we want to conduct electricity in this chamber. And what I need is some medium that's going to conduct the electricity. So we use buffer. This is the same type of buffer that we made our gel with. So it's mostly water, but it's not pure water, which would not conduct electricity. It is water with some solutes in it and some salts that allow us to conduct electricity through it. So I'm just going to fill my electrophoresis chamber so that the agarose gel is completely submerged. So you can see me pouring the liquid in, and it's going over and it's filling my gel. So essentially it's like my agarose gel is in a bathtub. It is completely underneath all of this liquid. Now we're ready to add our loading dye. Now I'm going to add loading dye to each one of my suspects and my crime scene sample, so 4 microliters. My next step is going to be adding my DNA samples to the agarose gel. The trick is I need to get my DNA samples into the wells. And so I'm going to adjust my pipette from 4 microliters, which you can see, all the way up to 20, because I want to add 20 microliters of my sample. I turn this dial to do that, and so now you can see that the pipette reads 20.0 microliters. Next thing I do is I put on a tip. I'm going to load my crime scene sample first. So I open it, I put my pipette in. I'm going to pipette up and down a few times to make sure I mix in that loading dye really well. And you can see we've got quite a bit more in our pipette than we've had before. And so I'm going to load it into this well here. So I very carefully put my pipette halfway into that well. I push this plunger down and it's pushing the liquid out. And I take it out. And so now you can see that red spot in there. That's where my DNA is. I'm going to load suspect 2. So the next step is I need to close up my electrophoresis box by putting the lid on. And then I need to actually have electricity going through here, so I need to connect it to a power source. So I'm going to take the leads from the electrophoresis box, plug them into the power source, and then I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to run 100 volts through this for about 30 minutes. So it's been about 30 minutes, so I'm going to stop the electricity. I'm going to unplug my leads from my power box. And I'm going to take my gel out of the gel electrophoresis chamber, and I'm going to put it on my trans illuminator box. So I'm going to open my box, I'm going to slide the gel onto the box, I'm going to close it, and I'm going to turn on the light. So as you can see here, we have the DNA from the crime scene, which is in this first lane. Then I skipped a lane, if you remember. Then we have suspect 1 in this lane. We have suspect 2 here, suspect 3, suspect 4, and suspect 5. So it's your job to determine if any of these suspects match the crime scene DNA.